Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the CMA's AEC Industry COVID-19 Roundtable. My name is Jonathan Hausner. I'm a partner in Bowditch and Dewey's real estate practice area. I practice construction law, and I'm going to be today's moderator. We've got a great panel here today. I'm really looking forward, personally, as I was just talking to the panelists about before we started, looking forward to the answer to these questions and see how everybody's adapting and changing now that we are working in what people are calling the new normal, which I'm never going to call the new normal. It's still weird to me, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what these folks have to say. We've got Keri, DiLeo from CSL Consulting, Tom Monticup from Whiting Turner, David Potter from Fennick, McCredie Architecture, and Chris Simmler from Jacobs. Why don't we start with Keri? You guys can introduce yourselves and then we'll get rolling.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Keri DiLeo, I'm a PX for CSL Consulting. I also run our independent school market. CSL, we do owner's representation and project management for private K-12, higher ed, developers, corporate hospitality, some nonprofit, kind of the whole gamut, retail, etc. I've been at CSL for about 8.5 years now, but my background, I actually worked with Tom at Whiting Turner for about 14 years before I made the switch. So I have kind of the perspective of the owner as well as the CM. And my role here is to run our independent school market, so K-12 day and boarding schools, as well as schools who specialize in services for special need children and adults. So that's me.
Tom?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, my name's Tom Monticup. I'm a vice president with the Whiting Turner Contracting Company. I've been here for 23 years, straight out of college. Whiting Turner, a little bit about Whiting Turner. We're based out of Baltimore, Maryland, but we're a national construction management firm. We do all types of construction. Up here in the Northeast, we're currently working in pretty much every state in the Northeast, anywhere from higher ed, science and tech, retail, sports and fitness, pharmaceutical, healthcare. Pretty much, if it's vertical construction, then Whiting Turner, we do it.
Dave?
Thanks, Jonathan. My name is David Potter from Fennick McCredie Architecture. FM serves a wide variety of project and client types, but in order to give a context for my responses on this panel, I spend a majority of my time in the CA phase of a project, basically in the sweet spot for fast track construction projects where design and construction services really overlap.
Great. Chris?
Hey, thanks, Jonathan. My name is Chris Simmler. I'm with Jacobs. I'm a PMCM business leader for the a portion of the New England region as part of an overall full service Jacobs entity up here for engineering, design, construction, commissioning, life sciences. My group specifically provides owners project management services, but also CM at risk services. So we've been working in the K through 12, higher ed, corporate, life sciences, and the federal government. So hopefully I can bring some of those perspectives to the panel.
Very good. Thank you all very much. So just by way of background, I wanted to do a little deeper introduction into the program and how this came about. It's been a number of months now. Most of us have all been working differently and adapting to COVID-19 since March, some earlier, some a little bit later. So when I was speaking with my colleagues on the CMA board, specifically Pam Deegan and Lou Tarney, handle programs, we thought it was a good idea now, after it's been a number of months, to check in with our colleagues who work at different outcomes, and how business and teams have adapted and how they've improved their adaptations over the period of time where folks have been working differently. And generally what they see as permanent changes and what they see as sort of pivots that they're only going to be working on or working with currently. So I guess the first thing I'd like to hear from all of the panelists, and we can go in the same order that we did the introductions, because that's democratic, which is a big word these days, and alphabetical. So we'll start with Keri, and then we'll run through it. What I'd like to hear is, other than working remotely, other than Zoom meetings, What most significant impact that COVID-19 and has had on your business? What have you guys done differently? What has been the thing you've had to adjust to the most, other than not being in the office?
Yeah, I mean, I think you say the new normal, right, is the thing we keep hearing. The word I keep hearing or thinking in my head is you have to be spry, right? So we've all had to figure out how do we do things that we've always done in a totally different manner. So what I've seen a lot, the default used to be the more of you can get on site, the better for meetings, for walkthroughs, for all of that. That's completely gone by the wayside. Now it's, only essential folks on campus. For the schools, we've seen a lot of technology being used for things like walkthroughs, existing condition surveys, as well as weekly meetings. And then, to the extent that there's been some impacts on scheduling, I think that it's there. It's not, I guess it's not as bad as I thought. There's definitely contractors that are trying to space out crews and separate folks. But I think the focus has really been on the PPE and getting people protected, and then trying to just limit the number of people in the same spot. So we've seen contractors saying, okay, this trade gets this floor on Mondays and that floor on Tuesdays or whatever, and trying to space folks out like that. But I'd say that fundamental shift of, yeah, we all have to be together in the same room has totally changed. And in some ways, I think has improved the way we run kind of the standard meetings by separating out the meeting from the walkthrough and all of that.
Interesting. Tom, same question. Maybe you can add a little bit more about scheduling. One of the things that we heard about as construction was shut down and then restarted, and then sort of the overlay with the government suggesting how CMs, go about performing construction work. Maybe you can add a little color on what Keri said about, scheduling, trade stacking, coordination, logistics, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk specifically about, the effect on the job site, because there's aspects of a job site that you really didn't think of before COVID, and one of those was how the workers get to the job site. Right, we don't realize how many out of town, out of state workers you have on a specific job site, and now all of a sudden that becomes a logistical challenge. We had 150 workers yesterday, now we're down to 100 because some of them fly in, they drive, they stay in hotels. They used to stay 2 to a room, now you have to go to 1 to a room. But to specifically answer your question with regards to scheduling, what we did was, we put a mandatory mask requirement. I call the mask, I shouldn't say that. It was face covering for all workers. They had to stay 6 feet apart at all times. In a certain scenario, when they're roughing in, mechanical roughing, when 2 workers had to be within 6 feet of each other, normally they'd fill out a job hazardous analysis for a specific task. But now we added, okay, if you're going to work within 6 feet of each other, you have to have special tasks. They have to wear a face covering plus an additional shield. They have to basically come up with a plan, a method, a procedure to do that, and we'd have to sign off on it. So it becomes a lot more work for everybody. But again, scheduling now with the 6 foot separation, people become less efficient. So, when this thing happened in the middle of a job, of course, you're going to get some change order requests for the efficiency dropping down. Moving forward, people know this is coming, so it's a little easier to schedule. But now, a job that normally took 12 months might take, 13 months because of the loss of efficiency. Costs are going to go up, for additional cleaning, for additional, again, people have to drive. They can't put 6 workers in a truck. Now there's 1 person per vehicle. So, like I said before, we always focused on once the workers got to our job site, we need to keep them safe and efficient. But now we have to worry about how they get to the job site, and even if, what they're doing, at night if they're out of town, what states don't allow, what states you have to quarantine. Sometimes workers come up, they have to get there 2 weeks early to quarantine before they can start on a job site. So there's lots of challenges that we've addressed, and we did it on the fly too, which is a challenge, but looking back, it was, it was exciting too to do that.
I bet it's impressive to see how so many different businesses have pivoted and how quickly after the shutdown, people were able to actually get back to work. And it's impressive to me to see, I mean, I live, close to downtown Boston, and there are construction sites everywhere, and seeing things, going up and getting closed in. And I'm always, looking at my watch and keeping track of things, because that's what I do. But
Yeah.
Tom, one of the things that Keri mentioned was technology. Has WT been able to leverage any technology to help with the things that you mentioned with respect to scheduling or keeping track of folks? And maybe one other thing you can touch on is enforcement. How often are you seeing folks either from the Commonwealth or from the federal government come by to check to make sure that WT's crews are doing what they're supposed to do?
Well, with regards to enforcement, I think we haven't seen too much. It's maybe typical, it's the same as like a safety or OSHA. They come randomly once in a while when the building inspectors are on site to do, a rough-in inspection or an insulation inspection. They're gonna look around, but we haven't seen too much of inspections coming just to check on COVID-19 compliance. It's possible if you get a complaint, the Board of Health might come and check on what you're doing. But, some of the things we did was we came up with a COVID-19 awareness plan almost immediately, similar to a safety plan. We required all of our subcontractors to come up with their own COVID-19 plans that we kind of gave them a template, a guide, so everybody's kind of on the same page with regards to that. But with regards to technology, I mean, when you're on a job site, it's been pretty similar for the last 100 years. It just takes people out on site to get things built. We're doing, I think, what everyone else is doing. The owners are calling in more. I mean, most of our job sites now have, large television screens. Everybody has, a laptop, an iPad, an iPhone. But with regards to technology and compliance, we use, for safety, we have an app on our iPhone called Target Zero. If someone's doing something they shouldn't, or if someone's doing something positive, we can give them an attaboy, via the iPhone or the iPad. But what we've done is we've taken our safety, checklist, and we've added COVID-19 compliance to that. We also have weekly checklists that we go through. Our trailers being cleaned twice a day. Our trailers are closed to visitors. No more conference room meetings, even, meetings with the foreman. And if we have a safety stand down with everybody on site, we do everything outside so everybody can socially distance. We have to, buy some megaphones and some speaker systems so they can hear us, but it's all about keeping people outside and spread apart. And, you still have that same schedule you had to get done, but now you have it's just another hurdle to cross, another problem to solve in the middle of a job.
Great, thank you. So Dave, we'd like to hear from you about how things have changed, and basically the same question, other than the fact that you're working remotely and doing more meetings over Zoom and so forth, how things changed at FM since March.
So there's two components to this, I would say, but they both share the same underpinning, which is basically the idea of collaboration. The design process is a very collaborative mode, and particularly at our office, we have in physical spaces developed areas that this can occur very organically. And of course, now doing meetings by Zoom, GoToMeeting, whatever it is, there's not the ability to kind of lean over and sketch the idea that you may have on the other person's piece of paper, which organically happens when you're in the office talking face to face. And so one of the things that we've seen the biggest shift in is the ability to have those conversations. What software basically enables that? So right in March, as soon as we realized this was happening, we jumped on to try to find options for software that we could really use to continue basically sketching, sharing ideas, and in real time still, and even something as simple as a whiteboard app has become kind of the savior of our process, right? Because we're able to get on, share our screen. That's only so good. You still want to be able to kind of organically sketch over someone else's drawing and them on yours, and so that's been really really helpful. I would say from a construction standpoint, when we're in CA and not just in the design phase, collaboration is also very important. It operates a little bit differently. We've noticed that the meetings that we have are much more structured. And we also noticed that the way that we meet, we bring everyone together, big room style, so that we're able to make sure that the messaging is very clear and that everyone's on the same page. Even more so than before, we're working as a team, owner, architect, contractor, really all in alignment. We're having more meetings, but they're working to keep us all working towards the same goal, whether it's solving a particular unforeseen condition that comes up on site. The way that we're meeting is different than it was in the past, and it, I think, will be something that carries forward after this. It's brought teams closer together because we really have to be all on the same page, communicating well, in order to remotely be doing what we all need to do in order to solve the one collective issue.
Excellent. That's great to hear. Chris, I would like to hear what you have to add, and I will add, I'm very happy to see that it worked out that we have two people basically from the OPM/CMPM side, because I know that CSL and Jacobs will have two different perspectives based on the company. So I was glad to see it work out that way. I'm happy. I'm very excited to hear what you have to add, Chris.
Well, thank you. I've noticed that our industry is incredibly adaptable, and as we figure out things, we seem to solve it and move on. And I think on the projects my team and the company's been part of, I think the key to it is risk mitigation. Really understanding, if you have time right now, the projects that were in process, we're just getting those done, but the new ones that are on the table, we've been working with clients, as an example, and CMs, making sure like a CM, their relationships with the subs is incredible. And if you can get a good CM that has those relationships, they can commit to the manpower, because that was one of the biggest concerns we had. Then at the same time, working with designers on alternate materials based on factory shutdowns or overseas procurements. So if you really have the time on the newer projects and then figure out, are we going to have impacts because of closeness and schedules, then I can advise clients to put in some maybe overtime allowances and contingencies to address that, to keep production and be more realistic. So that's what I've been seeing and how to cope with the COVID right now.
That's excellent, and I think that dovetails nicely with my next question. But one of the things I wanted to add was, one of the things that I've been hearing my entire career is how antiquated and how behind the times the construction industry has been with respect to adapting and and streamlining the business process. And I think that was all debunked recently, because one of the things that I've been impressed with my clients and with folks that I know who are building buildings and building roads and bridges, lightning fast, and it was really impressive to see everybody sort of band together for the purpose of completing projects. So Chris,
well, Jonathan, if I could add to that, if I could add to that also, that people are taking it seriously. I know sometimes before safety was, how you look at things, but everyone is taking this extremely seriously, and it's almost like common practice. So with that kind of buy-in, I think that has helped also.
I agree. It's really, to me, it's been impressive. I mean, there was a lot of worry at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic about what was going to happen in the construction industry. And it was, to me, both encouraging and frankly, just incredible to see how everybody really band together from, what everybody considered silos, the design silo, the CM silo, the owner silo, and all of those lines have blurred as people have come together to what we've always been saying, and what a lot of people have been banging the gun on for 50 years is let's do this as a team. And it seems like that has been, as the industry has been moving in that direction anyway, this has been, although negative in many parts, a positive catalyst to build teamwork and to build collaboration, because you can't, as a CM, solve all of the problems, or as an OPM or as a design professional, solve all of the problems without having clear and open lines of now more difficult communication, with your partners on the job. So Chris, you mentioned the sort of the difference between how you're dealing with projects that were happening at the time and new projects. And one of the things that I'd like to hear about, because I haven't heard a lot about, because my focus, frankly, has been with my clients on the projects that were impacted by COVID-19 and how they're getting to substantial completion now and what the cost and time impact was on those projects. How have you guys seen, and I think maybe we'll start with Dave and then we'll talk to everybody else, but because you're, as a design professional at the beginning of the process, how are you seeing COVID-19 impact now, like the beginning of the design process, and then as that design process moves into pre-con and then working with your construction partners on, design assist and, pre-con?
Sure. So in terms of early design, we see some of our clients really taking advantage of the opportunity because they realize that it's actually a good time to get ahead of design and get some shovel-ready projects for when this is behind us. So we've taken opportunity of that where we can, and there are ways that we've adapted in our office. Obviously, in person is not happening. We're 50% capacity in the actual office, staggered, every other person between desks and things. So the organic collaboration isn't happening, but I think we've overcome that. And so we're moving ahead in that respect. From the kind of overlap into construction, the design assist that you mentioned, actually, I was on a design assist when COVID started, and it was almost seamless how it transitioned to an online web-based program. I started to get curtain wall samples delivered to my house, which was pretty fun, and big mock-ups. And we started reviewing AVB termination details over Zoom, and it was actually not as problematic as I expected it to be. Even getting color samples and things, we just started a kind of home library of that stuff. We had great partners. What I took away from it was that rather than kind of have the silos and then everyone gets together maybe once a week for an OAC, really every day is an OAC meeting on our projects, especially on our big projects. Every day is an OAC meeting because the progress can be made much faster and much easier when everyone's on board together, and we're able to kind of jump on Microsoft Teams or whatever the meeting organizer is, in order to more quickly resolve it. And so it doesn't become like, oh, this is a construction issue that we have to go resolve. It's just, here's today's, item. We want to get through this together. And it seems to have made for faster resolution of issues when they arise.
Yeah, David, I'll just chime in on that too. I think that like you had mentioned earlier, you're getting larger number of folks participating in meetings, right? And so I think all of us on the panel probably had the same experience before, that we'd spend half the week in our cars driving from site to site or meeting to meeting to be with different groups, et cetera, et cetera. And now, and you had to choose, right, where you could be most effective or where you were most needed. And now it's really, it means more meetings, right? And it means more 30-minute meetings and more meetings per day, but you're able to be a part of a larger number of those discussions, whether or not you're participating. So, for me as a executive, I'm able to sit in on OACs that my PMs are running, and then be able to quickly drop back with them and say, okay, here's what I heard, make sure we're looking or keeping track of the following things. Whereas, in the past world, right, I would maybe only get to that OAC meeting once every other week or once every third week or whatever. So I think that's been fantastic. And I think the other thing that's been really interesting is to see the participation change over time, right? Because especially for me, so many of my clients are just really focused. They were really focused on just getting school open, right? And so we took advantage because the independent schools, many of them have a large break in March, right? And so we shut down right as their kids went home. And so we actually expedited, I'm like an, eternal optimist, but we expedited a number of our projects and got them going in March instead of June. And, truth be told, I don't think we would have made it to the finish line if we hadn't done that, because we had to spread people out. So it was more of a slow and steady, but it was March until August for these summer slammers instead of June until August. And it's been, like you said, it's been fast, and it's been, kind of everyone in it together. I think that is a huge differentiator between what we used to call like the messy projects and the clean projects. Everybody's project is messy right now. And so the contractors know that, the designers know that, the subs know that, the owners know that, and everybody's just trying to figure out like, okay, I can't get this tile this week, what can we do instead? Or I've got, like Tom said, I went through that right at the beginning, same thing. I've got this huge piece of duct that I need 3 guys to get up in the air. How do we work all together to do that? So I think that's been amazing to see, but there certainly have been some silver linings that I have seen. And I think that increased participation is one. I think that the taking advantage of students not being on site is another. And I think the last thing that has been really interesting is this is very different from the last kind of major interruption we had, back in the .com bust, where the stock market crashed. So in this case, like, it's really case by case. You have some companies that just totally stopped because they were very impacted, and others, like David said, like, that are like, yeah, no, let's keep going. We have the money, our portfolio is doing well. Let's just keep, foot to the floor and get ahead of it. So it's been really interesting on that side to see the impact of what the shutdown has done, kind of client by client.
Excellent. So Tom, what are you seeing, and what has changed with respect to your project planning and your early involvement in projects? How are things different now than they were when you were performing pre-con services for your customers and clients before COVID-19?
That's a good question. I think there's probably 3 major components of that I would bring up. The first one is cost, because there's kind of like this a little bit of butting heads. When this thing first happened was, there's been studies, the COVID has increased costs on a construction project by about 7% due to the inefficiencies, the additional cleaning, some of the challenges. But with the COVID came, a little bit of a slowdown in the economy. So the people that are paying for the project, they want to hear about, hey, the economy's slowing down. We should get more coverage on our bids. We should get better numbers. The numbers should go down. One of those, we've never seen this before. So during pre-con, it kind of threw us in a little bit of flux. Is there going to be an increase of costs, or is there going to be a decrease because the economy's slowing down? And I have a job starting next year, and I think subcontractors would be excited to have a large job on the books. So you're kind of a little bit, I don't want to say shooting in the dark, but it could go either way. So I think that's you got to kind of limit expectations when it comes to cost. The next component would be schedule. Same thing, we've done 5 of these projects and it takes 14 months. And now you got to say, well, it might take 14 and a half or 15 months because of the inefficiencies of people not being able to be within 6 feet of each other. You might have, the other thing you can't really plan for is if there's some sort of outbreak. There's 20 people working on this crew, and 5 of them test positive, and then they're gone for 2 weeks. You can't just magically get more workers, because especially around here in the Boston area, it doesn't seem like it's slowed down all that much. So I think there's been a strain on the schedule as people, owners and clients continue and want to get their schedule, their projects done when they were used to it. You got to kind of, again, limit expectations on how quickly we can get a project done. Cost-wise, again, some clients want to do temperature scanning at the gate before anyone comes on site. There's costs involved with those requests. And then I think the third one, during pre-construction, is you really got to look at procurement of materials. I've been speccing this material for 10 years. We've never had a problem, but as this thing struck, in March and April and May, we literally just watched factories shut down, that were on the critical path, whether it was, wood for a wood framed building, or or HVAC equipment, factory shut down. As they opened back up, there was kind of a bottleneck, because now everybody wants the equipment all at the same time or the material. So I think we had done a decent job making a procurement list. Anything that was supposed to be on this job site, whether it's 4 weeks from now or 26 weeks from now, we would call the supplier and the factory to see how they were doing with procurement, to see if there was going to be, hey, everything's an additional 8 weeks, you got to adjust your schedule. But even during pre-construction, I think you've got to either understand the lead times and maybe pre-release some of that material to get it here on time, or you need to just work with another material, a different material that you think you can get on time to deal with your schedule. So I think those are the three big components that we deal with construction.
Has there been one component or activity that has given you the most heartache over the last few months?
With respect to?
Yeah, with respect to completing it on time, like what's, meeting your obligations, staying on path. Has there been either one set of components, either, for example, mechanical versus lumber versus steel versus cement, or one activity, that's has been causing more heartbreak than others?
Well, I think in the bidding process in the last 6 months, even longer, I think on the mechanical side, the mechanical subcontractors seem to be stretched the most thin. We seem to get the least amount of coverage when we bid out mechanical, and that could be due to the fact that Boston Cambridge has so much science and tech and pharmaceutical work. Because of COVID-19, that work kind of exploded. And that's where all the workers are going, because there's the most work, and it's probably the most profitable. So that's where the subcontractors are going to focus. And then if you're doing maybe a residential project or one of the other projects that has a smaller margins, they're going to kind of shy away from that. So you have difficulty getting coverage on those types of projects. Material wise, I mean, you mentioned wood. We're doing a couple of wood projects now. We haven't had too much trouble with getting the wood, but I don't know if you noticed, but the wood spiked during the COVID-19. So, the price went way up, which kind of, as prices of material go up, the designer and the owners want to look at alternate materials to keep that price down. You want to, typically wood is always much less expensive than concrete and steel, but as it spikes unexpectedly, and you kind of have your cost model, here's how much I think this project's going to cost, that kind of throws it out of whack. So that's another thing that kind of gets you in pre-construction. If material spikes unexpectedly, it kind of hurts the cost model and the whether it's the conceptual or the schematic budget that you've done. It kind of throws you into a little bit of a spin that you need to, like you said, collaborate and work together and figure out the best path forward.
Excellent. Chris, same deal. How have things changed on the planning side at Jacobs and for your projects? What are you guys doing differently now, or what are you looking at more closely than maybe you would have in the past when you're putting together your plan to get the shovel in the ground?
As a company, I think Jacobs has done a tremendous job, safety and being proactive. And as far as I know in our region, I don't even think we've had a person yet with COVID. Very proactive, and the way we manage the office, who goes in. As far as like for my PMCM business, a lot of what the panelists have said, I concur with, but at a different perspective. Sometimes on new projects now, we're saying, what are we designed for? We all assume this COVID is a temporary condition, but what if it isn't? Or, do you want to look at new displacement ventilation and HVAC options that are more expensive? And when you do your programming, are you going to assume there's so many kids per classroom today versus the future? And so it's really, need some foresight into what you're going to design for, and we're all hoping that there's a vaccine, so then we go back to what's quote unquote normal. I know for on some of the other things we're doing is prefabrication as much as you can of things off site, bring them in. And I think my perspective on schedule impacts is that people are so focused, maybe because of all the conversations we have online, but they're so focused that we're actually addressing every little issue and trying to mitigate it versus letting things linger and sneak up. So I've actually, I've been fortunate on some of our major projects. Things have gone smoothly. When there's a labor issue or shortage or material, we attack it and it's mitigated. So that's something new when things used to linger a little and then you absorb the impact. But now, as far as cost, on one of my jobs, I've seen some people are putting them in the general conditions. Some people are absorbing them in the general conditions, but some have line items. Others in our New York region, I hear there's a lot of claims down there for COVID costs. Up in Massachusetts on my part, I haven't seen that yet, so I'm not sure it's a regional difference as to why.
Yeah, from my perspective, I haven't seen a lot of claims on COVID stuff. I've seen, because I do both transactional work and dispute resolution work, I've seen sort of the same thing. I've seen, team building. I've seen a little bit of butting heads on costs, but I've seen both, people asking for pricing up front and as much predictability up front as they can with respect to both schedule and cost on COVID-19 stuff. I'm a little worried that Chris Simmler might have my notes, because you actually just forecast my next question, which was, we're going to start with Dave on this one. I planned this thing to a T, and I did not share my notes with Chris, but he's clearly got some construction clairvoyance, so congratulations. The next thing I was going to ask was and we'll start with Dave on this one, once again from the design side, what are you seeing your clients and customers asking for now that was different? And I've got another question about sort of market factors that we'll get into after that, but what are you seeing your clients and customers asking for now that they weren't asking for before? What specific things are they asking you to help them with to adapt their space, once it's built, to what they see as their business process after, now going forward?
So two things. There's basically, how can we help them today while we're still in the midst of the pandemic? And that is basically all about designing for social distancing, allowing touchless faucets and other things of that sort, and making people in their spaces currently feel as comfortable as they can. The second one is kind of forecasting out post coronavirus, looking at, okay, so for the transportation sector, in projects that we do, how does airport furniture look like after this is complete? Are you still relying on large clusters of soft seating, or are those more unitized, where everyone's kind of got a more individual experience where they can sit separate from someone? We acknowledge that, hopefully this will be behind us, and the actual transmission won't be such an issue, but there is a perception that lingers for projects that we're designing now that wouldn't be open till after coronavirus, that there is a good desire for some separation, more screening between passengers or employees in large spaces, so that are transient.
Interesting. Keri, I'd like to hear from you on this, because you work, primarily in what's been considered. I mean, one of the things that's top of mind for most people is, school, kids. What are student bodies looking like? What do schools look like now? What are they going to look like in the future? And it's personal to everyone. So what are you seeing from your owner clients with respect to how they plan on adapting for the business of education from here on out?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, and my kids go to public school, so I can easily compare what's happening in my town versus what's happening on some of these boarding school campuses. But a lot of changes. So like David said, that right now we spent months doing every iteration of what do you do for temp dorms, whether it was bring in trailers, build out, gymnasiums, all of these options, not only for getting kids back to campus, but also what happens if they need to isolate. And I can say very confidently that every single client I have is doing it completely different. So some of my boarding school folks, their attitude was, we're going to bring our kids back and we're never letting anyone cross the border again until they go home for Thanksgiving. And then, I have some schools that have day students and or boarding and day, and their attitude is, we're going to get it. How are we going to deal with it when it comes? So a lot of work in terms of how dormitories operate. there's also obviously a change in how do dormitories get built in the future, right? So gang bathrooms, you know, I think some of the research that's been done that has indicated that it's not as critical on surfaces as it is, you know, with transmission through, you know, through particles and stuff. But at first it was like, no, every kid needs their own bathroom, and that can totally upset a, you know, college or independent school campus. I'd say the other thing that had already really kind of started at the, you know, before all of this happened was, like David mentioned, the furniture planning, right? So collaboration tables are not happening. So instead, what you're seeing a lot is, you know, individual little desks that you can push and pull apart. And so you can all meet as a huge group, or you can pull yourself 6 feet away from someone else. And honestly, that's, you know, that was the holdup in our public school, is not only do we not have the square footage to separate kids, but the little kids all sit at tables, and we didn't have enough furniture in the school system to be able to separate them. So I think that flexibility is going to just push into every ounce of every room. So labs that can be used as English classrooms, and auditoriums that can be used as science rooms. I mean, I think we had already started a push for that prior, but I think it's just going to be absolutely critical that every single room you build, there's going to be a, you know, a thought process about how do you turn this room into a classroom, either permanently or temporarily.
Interesting. So Tom, you'd mentioned that, you know, and of course you're dealing with projects that were in process during COVID-19 and projects that were starting the planning process. What have you seen with respect to your customers, you know, changing things during the process, and what are they changing about how they want to build their projects going forward?
Yeah, no, we're actually working on a few senior living facilities. So as you can imagine, you know, Keri talked about schools with children. Senior living facilities seem to be the most sensitive to this issue. And, you know, thank goodness the ones we're doing now are ground up. So, you know, we build the facility and then we go away and they come in. We've gone after and renovate a couple of renovations, which, you know, at this point, renovating a senior living facility is almost like doing a job in a laboratory or a healthcare facility where, you know, you just literally need to seal off. This is our side and this is your side, to keep any sort of infections or anything, you know, away from the. But the probably the one thing that jumps out at me, you know, like David and Keri mentioned, you know, the touchless faucets and the less communal places would be. The one thing that wasn't mentioned was people are talking about, you know, the mechanical systems, the air systems, and they're talking about putting, you know, ultraviolet lights in the ductwork to, you know, to kill the bacteria or the you know, the coronavirus. So. And nobody is 100% sure at this point if it works, because that's one of the things. Hey, we can put it in, but we can't guarantee the performance. But that seems to be the biggest. What we're doing right now is the mechanical systems and putting in whether it's, you know, more outside air, slower airflow, just the ability to adjust the system, you know, for normal time. And then, you know, like I said, if something like this happens, you know, we want to slow the airflow down, bring in more outside air. But I would say the scrubbing of the air, whether it's ultraviolet or some sort of HEPA filter, I think in the mechanical systems is probably the #1 on our projects.
So I'll throw this out there to anyone who wants to jump in. How receptive have owners been to the fact that projects now are necessarily going to cost more and take more time? How tough have owner clients been with respect to, we want this now and we want it, you know, on time and on budget, and, you know, keep it tight? Like how much, I guess I could say it like this, how much pain have your owner clients been willing to share with you? This is both a personal and professional question. I represent most of the owners. I'd like to know what you guys what your guys' experience is.
I would say, Jonathan, that it depends what market you're in, because I think the red people have the most difficulty right now. So we're doing a lot of deferred maintenance type projects because they don't know, you know, with revenue shortages and, you know, what to take on and which way to go, versus the K-12 in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. They continue to get bonds, and these projects are funded. So you see the K-12 and the MSBA does a great job. I haven't seen any changes to like how schools are programmed yet, but I'm sure that's going to be talked. I think people think it's going to resolve itself. In the federal government, we do a lot of presidential museums, and they're all closed right now. So we're able to go in and do renovation. So I guess it depends. And then in the life sciences market, it's such a hot market right now to get medicine to market and to make it. It's people going all out. So it depends, I guess, which client you're talking to and the challenges they face with revenue and planning.
Right on. Keri,
there is a little bit of a shift too. Again, you know, like Tom mentioned earlier about backlog, right? So there were a lot of subcontractors that just really panicked, and that, you know, at the beginning, because they didn't know how to implement the safety procedures, and then they figured that out, and then you know, there were some that were much more impacted by the city being shut down versus the suburbs not being shut down. So there was a little bit of that, and then you know, there were folks that were dealing with workers that didn't want to come to work because they were afraid. There were obviously people who were testing positive who weren't coming to work or were in quarantine. And then there was also this issue with the stimulus where there were, and it wasn't as widespread, I guess I didn't see as widespread as I was nervous about, but there were definitely folks out there that were making more money sitting at home collecting a stimulus check than they were going to work. And so I was very encouraged by the fact that most workers wanted to get back to work, but there was definitely a dip there for one of or all of those reasons. And so now there is an opportunity for clients to get some decent, you know, benefit from the current market doing buyout, because there's a kind of a blip in the backlog of where people are trying to fill that up. So yeah, there might be a little bit more cost for PPE or safety related, cleaning related items, but there also may be a little bit of a right sizing of the market that can maybe offset some of that. So we do a lot of work with our clients to try to strategize on when do you hit the market, how do you take some of those projects that were on hold and wrap them in with other projects so you're getting a bigger, more attractive project for the market, and try to buy that in such a way that you're kind of identifying to folks, like, you know what you're getting into, we know the rules of the game, assume it's going to be like this or worse, and try to kind of buy down some of that risk.
That's excellent. So one of the things that we've heard a lot about in the market, or at least that I've heard a lot of news about, is you know, pivoting away from what, you know, a lot of people saw as the bread and butter of the New England market, which was either mixed use or residential, and getting more towards, you know, pivoting some of those, you know, at least partially entitled projects to something else, like, and Tom mentioned earlier, and Chris mentioned earlier, life science or healthcare. Are you folks seeing any of that with, you know, commercial developers deciding that, you know, this was originally going to be like, you know, a stick-built apartment building, and now it's going to be lab space? Why don't we start with Chris, since he's probably got my notes.
Well, I think from my personal experience, I think it's regional. Down where I am in Falmouth, Massachusetts, we have an incredible worker housing shortage because it's a seasonal community. So those projects are still full force. Now then in Boston, and you have all these developments going on, that whether they can fill them or not, or reducing rent. So I think it's a regional question, honestly, about whether people are shifting. Obviously, the life sciences has been all out and to address this, but I wish I could answer more on that. But I think it's region to region and what's needed.
Sure. Well, Tom, you guys have got a national footprint. What are you hearing from your colleagues about where the market's going, and if it's changing, if it's changing at all, and if it is, you know, how?
Yeah, we actually, it's funny you use that word, because we actually had, in early April, we came out with a thing we call Operation Pivot, where, you know, because we have groups like, you know, I do sports and fitness, we have entertainment, we have hospitality, and we have retail, and they kind of took a nosedive. So we have some pivot industries that I was just writing down, but so we have, you know, calls every week specific to those industries to try to you know, find more work. But it's science and tech. We combine science and tech and pharma, even though normally they'd be separate. But science and tech and pharma, healthcare, believe it or not, food processing and warehouses is a big one. You know, obviously people are sitting at home, and you can, when you get bored, you go on your phone and you can order something. It gets delivered to your house fairly quickly. But to do that, there needs to be a lot of warehouses around. So I think the warehouses in the food processing industry we combine those as well. And then government's another one too. Whenever there's some sort of slowdown or recession, the government seems to step up the spending. So we do that type of work, but that's one that really doesn't dip. It kind of stays even keel, all the time. So you can always count on, whether it's the federal government or the state or local municipalities working on those. But those are the industries that we focus on. The other one nationally is mission critical. That's been strong for a long time. It's not as prevalent in the Northeast, but nationally it's going pretty well. So we have 16 industries that we focus on, but those are the ones we call the pivot industries that we focus on, that we think there's going to be an explosion. And even after this vaccine, the pharmaceutical industry is going to continue to build, because there's going to be supplemental and collateral work after the vaccine's out.
Excellent.
Yeah, and Jonathan, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Please go.
You mentioned retail sorry, Chris mentioned retail, but you mentioned entitlements. I think what we're seeing too is a lot of repositioning of existing square footage. So, for instance, you have all of these malls, brick and mortar, that have all these spaces that are just vacant, and probably those retailers will never come back in a brick and mortar environment. So you have, big firms like Simon trying to say, okay, well, what's next, right? And you're starting to see like Wegmans is moving into the mall, or, there's some of these final mile type entities like Amazon that need that warehouse space. And they also, so instead of having, an Amazon store, you have an Amazon warehouse with a service counter, right? And so just taking all of that square footage that is there and using that for totally different things. But we've definitely seen that. And then I think the next phase is going to be office spaces. So we already are working with one of the landlords in the Burlington area, taking some office space and flipping that to laboratory space or flex research space, things like that. Because I think between the fact that people are going to stop maybe working in offices and the fact that I think there may be another shift, I feel like the technology shifts in and out of the city based on a lot of factors, but used to be based on rents, and now it may be based on the fact that people don't want to take public transportation, and being able to provide a high-tech location where folks can drive their cars to work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just to editorially, I'm working on 3 different projects where that exact thing is happening, where health science clients are shifting what was originally meant to be office space to R&D and science space. And I'm learning very quickly how complicated and how different those 2 things are, because I am only nominally a construction professional. So I needed really dummy down, and I got to dummy down in a real nice fine point put on how different a clean room is from an office. So Dave, so I guess sort of the same question. What are you seeing on the design side from demand, and whether or not the demand, for people asking, for a particular type of product, what's different now from, if anything, from now than it was in 2019?
We specialize a lot in airport design. And so something that's been very interesting that's come out of this is the desire for passengers to fly through local smaller airports. So the smaller airports we've seen are trying to kind of reposition themselves a little bit through this, so that on the other end of this, they come out kind of attracting their local communities. Interestingly enough, we also saw interest in community center projects, which you wouldn't think of being prevalent right now. But I think people are looking kind of around them as they stay home, and they're looking to how they can improve their community and the place that they live. And it's one of the ways. So it's interesting that kind of being at home, working from home, people have started to check out their surroundings and see how they can improve it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we've got about 5 minutes left. And I have to say, once again, just editorially, this is exactly what I hope this panel is going to be about. I've learned a ton. It's been extremely informative, and it's very nice to hear that some of the things that I'm learning sort of online are right, and some of those things are not entirely right. So I want to give you a preemptive thank you. The last question I have is sort of like war story slash, what's happening now, and we'll go back to our democratic process. We'll start with Keri. What has been the most like creative or innovative or surprising thing that you've seen, either you or your colleagues or one of your customers? Like, what was the thing, that sort of like raised your eyebrows the most? And so, that's something I'll remember, other than the fact that, you only get to go to work every now and then, that I'm going to remember for the rest of my career. I'm going to think back and be like, oh, that was a 2020 thing and a real lesson learned from me.
That's a great question. I guess I'll go back to the thought about the technology. There's technology out there in the construction world that I didn't even know existed, and it was almost novel. For instance, programs like Matterport Instruction Site, where the CMs are able to create these, like they call them doll houses, like 3D models, and I think that first, like, oh my goodness, none of us can go to the site, what do we do? And then almost immediately, our CM on a project had used it just as an existing conditions, and all of a sudden we're in the model in the middle of a meeting sitting in our homes. And it, like you said, it was so antiquated the way we were doing it before, where we had to get everyone there. And this was like, oh my God, what were we doing? Like, this is so easy. We can all see, we're all looking at the same screen. We know exactly what we're talking about. So I think that quick focus to the technology that we actually already had, and actually using it the right way was fantastic.
Excellent. Tom, how about you? What are you going to take away from 2020?
So you mentioned the word war story, so I think I'll go with that for a minute, because a lot of good's going to come out of this, with the technology and the collaboration. But I think what I'm going to remember is all of the stuff that we took for granted that you never thought about, how much planning went into that. So for Whiting Turner, for us to come back to our office, we had to have a plan that we submitted. And we had to do density diagrams and traffic flow, but it's just amazing the stuff you think about, right? Like, you can't use public transportation. You have to drive in, individual in your own car. When you pull into a parking space, you want to make sure nobody's on your left or right getting out at the same time. When you come in, are you going to touch the door? Don't use the elevator. You got to walk up the stairs. Try not to touch the handrail if you don't have to. Should we prop the door open so they can get in? When they get in our office, they got to wash their hands or use hand sanitizer, go right to your workstation, then you can take your mask off. If you do have to go to the bathroom, try to use the individual bathrooms and wash your hands. And we switched the faucets and the soap, everything to touchless. We talk about collaboration, but if you're in the office, try not to collaborate with anyone in person. Call them on the computer, even though they're right there, which it's weird, but it's a safe thing to do. Same thing on our job sites too. Okay, we're shutting the kitchen down. Make sure you bring your own coffee, your own lunch. Don't use the microwave. Stop using the refrigerator. Bring in a cooler with a pack. It's all the little things that you had to think about. You never thought you'd plan. Like I said before, hey, we're going to send 100 workers to our job site. Well, where are they coming from? What state are they coming from? How are they getting here? Where are they staying? Are they sharing tools? How close do they have to be together to glaze that piece of glass? So for me, it's going to be the amazing amount of little finite things that we had to think about that we never did before. We have 50 new checklists, on our job sites to make sure things are, happening the way they should be.
Dave, how about you guys and your colleagues at FM? What are you going to take away as the biggest lesson learned from 2020?
Sure. So, there are all these unknowns, but through the unknowns, we've just found that the takeaway is collaboration with our clients and with the contractors we work with. It has just gotten better because basically it necessitated us to jump all in and be all together, even though we're remote. It's an irony of this time and the process that by being disparate, we're actually necessitating more collaboration than we had before. So it's going to be one of our takeaways, and it's going to have to kind of be pervasive through our work process going forward.
Chris, I know you can't have pre-prepared because this is a question I developed on the
Just
fly.
made it
So
up
whether you
now.
stole my notes or not, this is a pop quiz.
And I know time is short. I'm just gonna, and on a positive note, what I'm gonna take away is I can't believe as an industry, even as a company, Jacobs, how we've been able to adapt. It's almost been like a military, I come from the Marine Corps background. It's almost been like a military operation for people coming together 24/7 and figuring this out. So that's what I'm gonna take away, how we're overcoming this.
Excellent. Well, happy Veterans Day and thanks for your service. And thank you all very much. This is, like I said earlier, this has been exactly what I hoped it was going to be. It was deeply informative. It was great to work with all of you on this. And that's it. So thanks very much all. And
Thank you.
It was our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, enjoyed it.
Appreciate it.
All right, take care.